We begin the last lecture here on Philippians. It's chapter 4. And as we look at chapter 4, and it's a very, very personal chapter, and in some ways it's got one very interesting section, at least for me. Um, it's very simple. There are no textual issues here, text critical apparatus wise. There are no real translation issues here. You are dealing in some cases with rare words, and in some cases with words that just aren't found anywhere else. Um, but in their context, they all make sense. So we don't have any of that. What we do have is Paul going back through this letter, and all the major themes of this letter are going to now get brought right to the fore here in the first part of chapter 4 of Philippians, where there is a conflict between two women, and they get named. This is really important. These two women get named, and it's not to shame them. And this is really key. So let's look at this text. Let's ask what's happening here in this church. Then go look at the verbs and the nouns that come from the rest of this letter that have been repeated over and over and are going to continue to get repeated in this chapter. We begin with chapter 4, verse 1, and I will just for now read down through verse 9. My brothers and sisters, dear friends, beloved, whom I long to see, my joy and crown, stand in the Lord in this way, my beloved. I appeal, or I beseech, I beg, I urge Euodia and Syntyche to agree in the Lord. Yes, I say also to you, true companion, help them. They have struggled together in the gospel ministry, along with me and Clement and my other co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let everyone see your gentleness. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything. Instead, in every situation, through prayer and grateful petition, tell God what's on your heart and mind. And the peace of God that surpasses all understanding will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is worthy of respect or honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if something's excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things and what you've learned and what you've received and what you heard and what you saw in me. Do these things, and the God of peace will be with you. A couple of notes about this text before we exegete it. The phrase, the peace of God, that passes all understanding, the peace of God, that phrase, never found in the New Testament. It's the only time. You do have, as you find in verse 9, the God of peace. You find that in the New Testament. But the only time you'll find the peace of God is in the verse 7. Okay. Second, we would go crazy trying to identify the characters in this text. The early church fathers tried and failed. The modern scholars have guessed and failed, and nobody knows who they are. Whoever these two ladies are, whoever this true yoke fellow is, whoever Clement is, we don't know. We just don't know. We can presume that figures like Epaphroditus belong in Timothy and Silas, and others belong in the category of co-workers. But again, we don't know whether Paul's referring to Philippian co-workers or just general co-workers in his mission field. Okay, now having gotten those couple of things out of the way, let's come to the issue at hand. We have two ladies who are at loggerheads with each other. What is the issue? You'll notice that he tells them to think the same way, to think in their heads, to agree in the Lord. Just this is what I want you to do. I want you to think this way. This harkens all the way back to chapter 2, verse 1 and following, where Paul says, look, if there's any encouragement in Christ, and there is, we saw it was a second class condition, any comfort provided by love, and there is, yada, yada, have the same love, be united in spirit, have one purpose, and instead of being motivated by selfish ambitions or vanity, each one should consider the other better than themselves. And it would appear here that we are dealing with that kind of a situation. Both these women have apparently been from the beginning in Paul's Philippi mission. They have been with him there from the beginning in this. And we can presume there are at least 4 house churches in Philippi. We can presume that. We may be dealing with leadership issues between the churches. We also know that we're dealing with influences from the outside, from Jewish Christian zealots that have come through the area or are coming through the area. We know this church is in some kind of trouble, just as Paul's in some kind of trouble. We know that there have been some that have been afflicted, just as Paul's being afflicted by the state. So whatever's happening in this congregation, these two women could solve a lot of the crisis in the congregation if they would agree, quote, in the Lord. There is nothing said here about what they need to agree on. It's not there. There's nothing in the text that gives you any idea of what they are to agree on. But he does emphasize this same kind of relational orientation that we saw in chapter 2. And in fact, in chapter 1, where Paul's talking about his relationship to the Philippians, of gentleness, this meekness, this esteeming the other more important than themselves. And he tells them, let everyone see your gentleness. This is key. This is about I suspect this is some kind of a power play that's happening in the church, or somebody's not receiving the recognition they think they deserve. And so they are in a shame honor society. The way to gain honor is to shame the other one, and you can take that honor, and it's like a commodity. And then they come and they shame you and take it back. And we see this all the time. This is what the newspapers are about and the tabloids, right? Okay, so we've got this being specifically addressed by Paul. These two women have got to come together and they've got to think alike. But the thinking is apparently in terms of the model of behavior that's being either inculcated or lived out. And Paul sees these women as not necessarily living out the model that he brought to them, that he's already talked about previously when he says, imitate me, and he's going to do it again here in verse 9. So it's this apostolic imitation that these ladies are failing in. And it's not about, again, right doctrine. It's about the way they're relating to each other in or within that Philippian house church orbit. Now, in verse 4 are going to begin a series of imperatives. We've moved to a very paranetic section of the letter. You might be tempted to say here that Paul's going to give a kind of a moral code. It's not that at all, and it's certainly not any kind of a didache. But let everyone see your gentleness. The Lord is near. Don't be anxious about everything. Pray about everything. Tell God your request. This group of imperatives is what these ladies and the Philippian church need to do in order to resolve their situation. The first thing they need to do is rejoice in the Lord. This is obviously a congregation that has lost its ability to to rejoice. I don't know of a better way to say this than just simply to rejoice, to be grateful, and to have that view of human history that allows them, in a sense, to laugh, to not take anything so seriously, that life is chimeric, like it changes. It's not, it's illusory in that sense, and that God alone uh, is that in which we can truly rejoice. The Lord is near. Now, this can be taken one of two ways. It could be taken temporally. The Lord is near in time, like a second advent. It can also be spatially. The Lord is near. The Lord is very present, near here, in the congregation. Either way, it doesn't matter. The Lord is near is the motivation for don't be anxious about anything. The two sentences belong together. And then comes the injunction for prayer with thanksgiving. And if that happens, then the congregations in Philippi will experience God's peace, the peace that just passes understanding. It's a given peace in that sense. Now, in verses 8 and 9, this is where it gets really curious for me. You'll notice that he starts off by saying finally again. He said that in 3 verse 2, finally. Now he's going to use his second finally. And this is why some scholars say, oh, well, look, Paul said finally twice. That's why we've got a pastiche of letters here. And I would say, no. He started chapter 3 by saying finally, and then he launched on too long. And now he's going to do his finalies, here. So he says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever's true, worthy of respect, just, pure, lovely, commendable, excellent, or praiseworthy, think about these things. This is an interesting list. Um, and there's several things about this particular list here that are interesting. We have to remember where we're at. We're in Philippi. It is a Roman colony, but we have a substantive Jewish audience here as well in this congregation. It's a mixture, isn't it? Okay, little bit of one. And so when we come to these nouns, true, worthy of respect, or honorable, semna, just, pure, lovely, where do these words come from? Well, they're used in the philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, but some of these terms are also found with slightly different connotation in the later translations of the Greek Old Testament, the Septuagint, and other Greek writings that are Jewish in origin. And we have parallels, certainly in some of these words, with Stoicism and Epicureanism. So it would appear that Paul is looking at his cultures, this mixed culture, this Greco-Roman culture, but also now Jewish, and he's picking terms from these various subcultures and bringing them together in this pastiche of that which is praiseworthy. Or the other term he uses here is excellent, that which is arete, that which is excellent. The invitation, I think, here is not to say, oh, that Paul's trying to say that culture's good. He's not saying that. He's saying that culture can produce things that are worthy of consideration and respect. And those are the things to think on, not everything else. This is not a general affirmation of human culture. It's an affirmation of that which in the human species has, in a sense, peaked. We have many thousands of examples. Albert Einstein, Marie Curie, Simone Weil, Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Who else? Come on. Don't say Fauci. No. Um, you know what I mean in terms of people who've done excellent things, people who've done honorable things. Um, Paul invites the Philippians to focus on those things. Why? Because they were focused on the opposites of these kinds of values and virtues. They had gotten themselves into a gutter mentality in their head. They were looking for problems where no problems need to be found. What did Einstein say? Uh, there are some people that what? Oh, shoot, Jim. Sorry, this just came through. It interrupted my flow of thought. There are some people that can find a problem for every solution. And there are those kinds of people. And they're to be avoided. And Paul wasn't one of those. He invites them in light of this list. Notice how this list of cultural virtue is immediately followed by discipleship. What you learned, what you matheted, what you were discipled by me in. This is that noun, that verb, manthano. What you were discipled in. What you received, that's the passing on of the tradition. We've seen this as a technical term, paralambano, to pass on the tradition. What you've learned in discipleship, the pattern of discipleship that we've already seen in that U-shaped salvation of chapter 2, and received, there's the tradition, and heard about me, and what you've seen in me. He says, you do this. Paul is now the human model for the Philippian church. And he says, when they do this, the God of peace will be with them. Now the letter ends, and it's the commentators are funny here because the letter ends with Paul, in one sense, saying, I'm going to tell you that I have money needs, and you met them, and I'm not writing to tell you I have money needs, even though I have money needs, but I'm okay. But really, and he's trying to kind of hedge his bets here in this last little text with the Philippians. Before he says goodbye. So let's have a little fun with the Apostle Paul here, shall we? He says, I have great joy in the Lord. How many times have we seen the word joy now in this epistle? At least a dozen, because it occurs 14 times in this letter, the verb or the noun, karaite or kara. I have great joy in the Lord because now at last you have again expressed your concern for me. There's a parenthesis. Now, I know you were concerned before, but you had no opportunity to do anything. I'm not blaming you for what you didn't do, he's saying, but I get it. He's saying, but I know you're concerned. He says, I'm not saying this because I have a need, but I've learned to be content in any circumstance. Now, part of me almost wants to parody this. I really do. I really want to say Paul should be parodied here, but I can't do that in genuine heart to the apostle, so I won't. Um, for I've learned to be content in any circumstance. And we've seen, at least from his letters, if not from the book of Acts, the kinds of circumstances that Paul has been in. And there are plenty of times where he has been in want. And those times probably exceeded the times that he was in plenty. I've experienced times of need and times of abundance. In every and each circumstance, I've learned the secret of contentment, whether I go satisfied or whether I'm hungry, whether I have more than I need or whether I have nothing at all. I'm able to do everything, endure everything, go through everything, appreciate everything through the one who strengthens me. Nevertheless, Paul says, you do well to share with me in my trouble. He's thanking them. This is kind of a roundabout way of saying, thanks, guys. You've got my back. I appreciate that you've had my back. And in fact, in the letter to 2 Corinthians chapters 8 and 9, Paul praises the Philippian church, the Macedonian churches. He praises them as the ones that were from the beginning supportive of him and supportive of his ministry. And so we know there is money in Philippi. We know there is at least some money in Philippi because Paul is constantly being supported by this particular congregation. Verse 15, and as you Philippians know, at the beginning of my gospel ministry, when I left Macedonia, remember this letter is being written in late 52, but when did he first come to Philippi? Sometime in the early 40s. When, at the beginning of my gospel ministry, when I left Macedonia, no church shared with me in this matter of giving and receiving except you alone. In other words, the Philippian church was the only church that Paul started that said, this dude has got something here. We need to make sure that he gets out and gets his message out there. And they did. They were his big donor support base. They were the ones that made sure Paul was able to do his missionary work. Even in Thessalonica, on more than one occasion, you sent something for my need. Now, Philippi and Thessalonica are not that far apart. They're both in Macedonia, northern Greece, lower Macedonia. And the Philippians would hear Paul had a need, and boom, they would meet that need. I do not say this because I'm seeking a gift. Rather, I seek the credit that abounds to your account. In other words, when they give to Paul, it's to their credit. This again, we've got language of accounting here, like we did in chapter 2 and chapter 3, the language of accounting. He seeks that which is a credit to their account. For I have received everything, and I have plenty. And he says, I have all I need because I received from Epaphroditus what you sent, a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, very pleasing to God. And this, again, this language, if your mind is thinking of Paul, you want to go to Romans 12, 1 and 2, make yourself living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. That is your acceptable service. This is similar language to that in Romans 12, 1 and 2 about discipleship as sacrifice, being the sacrifice. And he says, my God will supply every need according to his glorious riches in Christ Jesus. I want to say two things about this text. One, it doesn't say God will supply every want. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say God will supply every desire. It says God will supply every need. Need will be met. Not want, not desire, but need. Second, this need is not necessarily or even primarily physical, because the riches are found in Christ Jesus. They are spiritual or psycho-spiritual. They have to do with the healing of the self, the orientation of the self to the self and to others, and the healing of perspective. Finally, he says, give greetings to all the saints in Christ Jesus, all the Philippian house churches. The brethren here with me, they send their greetings. And so presumably the Philippian church knows which brothers or sisters are sending the greetings back. And he says, all the saints greet you, especially those who belong to Caesar's household. This is why we know he's the second reference from going back to chapter 1 that he's under the Praetorian Guard. The phrase Caesar's household can be used to refer from top of the line royalty to the servants that work in the household, okay? Or administrative assistants or these kinds of things. Presumably here we're just dealing with local bureaucratic officials in Philippi. It's not some kind of glorious reference to, Paul's getting close to the emperor, he's Nero's Paula White or something. And then he ends this letter with his standard salutation. The grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. And that concludes the letter of Paul to the Philippians. Let's review this. A congregation in crisis. Multiple types of crises between personalities in the congregations, and a social crisis of some sort that's afflicting the congregation. It's a congregation who is at least experiencing a tendency where people are exalting themselves at the expense of others. And it's a congregation that has lost its way when it comes to the imitation of Christ. And Paul has to call this congregation back to this imitation, to this model, this U-shaped model of letting go and letting God, in a sense. This model that chooses the other, this model that esteems the other, this model that affirms and is nurturing to the other, this model that's not selfish or vainglorious, nor do they, when they are preaching the gospel, they don't do it out of envy to be better than somebody else. And they don't do it out of the need to be praised, the vainglory. Okay? Paul reminds them, especially these two women, they were with him from the beginning. Everybody has seen how he acts. Everybody has heard from him about this Jesus pattern. They've matheted it. They've been discipled in it by Paul. They've heard it from him. They've seen it in him. Okay? They've received from him this Jesus tradition, how this is who we are, this is who he is, this is what he did, and this is how we behave. It's all one thing. And he urges them to come back together. Now, we don't know the ending of the story here in Philippians, but we do know that they were a church that lasted well into the 2nd century because Polycarp wrote them a letter acknowledging this letter to the Philippians we have just read. So whatever it was that happened in the 1st century had been healed. And that Philippian church was an important congregation going into the 2nd century. And so we're going to end that part of our lesson here. I'm going to repeat what I said earlier to you guys at the beginning, and that's this. Next week, I'm doing the Jesus seminar. That's Saturday the 12th. The following week is Holy Saturday the 19th, that we will not meet on that day. But the following Saturday, which is April 26th, we will meet and we will start reading in Colossians together. And we'll do the same thing we just did here. What's kind of fun about this, and it hadn't occurred to me till I was starting to read again, was we just read Paul's last letter, the last letter we possess that he wrote, if we follow Campbell's chronology, of course, and that's Philippians, written in the late summer of 52. We're going to go read the earliest prison letter Paul wrote in 50, and that's Colossians. and again with Campbell's chronology, Colossians, Philemon, and Ephesians uh, are all written early. They're the early letters that we have prior to Romans, Galatians, Corinthians, and being written. And of course, Thessalonians is written in 41. So we'll get to be with Paul in prison again in Colossae. And great stuff gets written from prison. You know, the letter from the Birmingham jail, letters and papers from prison by Bonhoeffer. A lot of good stuff. Yeah. Okay, let's open it up and have some conversation here. What'd you learn in this letter? What's your takeaways? Anything good?
I'm worried that I might be mixing up seminars and classes, but in this letter, in the earlier lessons and passages, we did speak about the conflict between the Jerusalem church and this church. And so, one question I would have is there any scholarly opinion on the conflict between Euodia and Syntyche or whoever? Is it probable or possible that it's related to the Jerusalem Paul conflict? Like, would one of them be advocating this or
Yes. So
intertwining or?
back at the turn of the 1800s, Ferdinand Christian Bauer, F.C. Bauer, argued that the two ladies are symbolic, one of Jewish Christianity, one of Gentile
Oh, okay.
Christianity. He sees them as symbolic.
Okay.
There's just no evidence about anything
Hmm.
with regard to these women, except their names. Their names are well attested in inscriptions and things. So they're real names, you know.
Hmm.
Um, I'm gonna say I don't think that's the issue here because Paul
Hmm.
uses none of the language of justification here at all,
Hmm.
and it's usually uh, I mean he does refer to these people as dogs, but he the issue for Paul in this text is their zealousness. You know, they would go so far as it's their zeal that Paul has the issue with, which is why he calls them mutilators rather than circumcisers,
Hmm.
katatome rather than peritome. I have been pondering myself about that list of virtues and how easy it is for me to want to see those virtues only in the framework of my community of intellectual agreement and to fail to see those virtues in other communities and other parties, and that it's just becoming more and more incumbent on me this week as I've been mulling over this particular passage that a significant part of the crisis that we're in right now is that we are thinking about negative things all the time. We're thinking about injustice. We're thinking about hatred. We're thinking about the illegalities of the government or the illegalities of peoples and people groups, or we're just focused on the negative. We're just completely focused on the negative, and it is just eating away at our soul. So I've been thinking about this in light of that, you know, what would happen? What would happen if the churches around America today, all of them, decided, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to follow Paul. We're going to do this. We're going to start looking for the good. We're going to start looking for the that which is honorable, you know, instead of just blanket trashing the other side. So I don't know. I'm just mulling that around in my head.
The political illusion, right? Jacques Ellul.
Jacques Ellul, that's right.
And I don't know if you know that book by David Lloyd Dusenbury. Um,
Not a name I
I,
recognize.
I judge no one.
No.
It's a brand new book. It made quite a splash. It got a lot of. I don't know why I ordered it so quickly. I think actually I do know why, because the blurbs I thought, oh, I've got to read this. I'm sure you'd like it. It's deadly expensive, but it's like $50 for the hardcover. I Judge No One by David Lloyd Dusenbury, and I'm not sure um, whether he's an historian. He's not a
Uh-huh.
theologian. He's an historian, so it's kind of an historical Jesus. But it fascinatingly, it's the main thesis of it is that what Jesus was remembered for historically, like on the broadest sweep. He doesn't just stick with the canonical gospels. He does all, it's beautifully written. He does all the scholarship with all the little mentions in Josephus and all these other
Mhm.
non-canonical sources. And the thing that made Jesus so weird was that he well it's in the title, I Judge No One. He stepped back from politics in the sense that he
Mhm.
refused to
Right.
participate. I mean, you've been saying this. He refused to participate in the he wasn't a revolutionary, for example. He
Right.
wasn't one of the zealots, for example. And I think in our time, it's just, you're either a Christian of the right, hated by the left, or you're a Christian of the left, hated by the right, and it's very hard to be in the center. But it occurred to me when you were talking about the virtues and the modeling, one thing I thought about was murmuring in my mind was how can can this be scaled up? Like when you think about manufacturing something, they talk about
Yes, I know what
scaling things up,
scalability.
you scale.
Yeah.
So uh,
So the answer is
is
yes.
the answer is sorry?
Yes. Think about
Yes.
it this
Okay.
way.
Okay.
In 320, Paul uses the word polituma, citizenship, our citizenship, right? He refers to Jesus as a kurios, as a Caesar. Um, Here in there's actually some I didn't observe it before, but I can point it out to you now. There's actually some this phrase written in the Book of Life. It has one background in Jewish apocalyptic literature, but it's parallel. Its civic parallel would be the citizenship roles in the main temple, right? The citizenship roles. So Paul has this whole scalability thing,
Hmm,
including the civic virtues of this new polis, this new city, right? This ecclesia.
mhm,
It's all there. So but the scalability is not from small to great. It's from great to small
hmm,
to great.
hmm. Where is that again? Sorry.
Philippians 2,
Okay.
who did
Okay.
not consider equality with God to consist in the act of grasping,
Oh,
hold of
oh, oh,
to
okay.
death,
Yes.
and was
Yeah, yeah,
raised.
yeah. Yeah. In the hymn. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking institutionally, when you get a big institution, thousands. I guess I was thinking Paul's writing to house churches,
Correct.
and so you can kind of think about, it's easier to think about, let's all imitate Jesus when you're talking about maybe four house churches, 50 people each, 200 people. When you're talking about, I don't know, the Roman Catholic Church or the Southern Baptist Convention,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you've got people in there and they're in charge of thousands, then
right.
what happens, right? The
Yeah.
temptations to be powerful are so great, right?
The church as an institution absolutely has to die.
Mhm,
The church as a bureaucracy has to go.
mhm,
And what needs to remain behind, and the only thing I think that needs, well, two things I think need to remain behind. One is the Mass, the liturgy of the Mass. That has to stay. And the second is the role of apostolic tradition, both within Christian leadership and Christian scripture. And I think we have to rethink that. Um, the problem is, you got someone like Pope Francis who came in and tried to redefine the papacy in terms of his character and thinking, right? And he's only able to do it for a season. And those that are opposed to him know this, and they'll wait him out until they can get their guy in, you know. Um, I don't know that we can change from the top down in the church, you know. Um, I don't know.
The church as an institution has to die. That's something that only a good Protestant could say and feel good about, right?
I don't know. Sherrod
Uh,
said it, and he was a Catholic.
oh, did he say it? Where did he say it?
He says the church is the only religion. Christianity. He says Christianity is the only religion to proclaim its own demise,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
same thing as saying the church has to die.
Mm, mm,
You know.
mm. Yeah, I always read him there. It's kind of, that this is a slightly different idea, that the idea that the Marcel Gauchet line, Christianity is the religion of the end of religion, which is a
Yes.
slightly different argument, I think,
Right.
from the church itself as the uh, vessel inside which the gospel is preserved. We can kind of let it go, and the gospel can survive elsewhere. I think that makes a lot of people nervous for understandable reasons because they wonder, okay, what are we going to hang on to? But your notion of the liturgy has to stay, apostolic tradition has to stay. That's a lot if those two things
It is.
stay.
It is. It
Yeah,
includes a lot.
yeah, yeah,
It includes an awful lot.
yeah.
But and this is why I'm not a good Protestant.
Well, especially because the liturgy isn't central to, at least not the Protestantism I was brought up in.
No.
Anglican, yeah, but not Anabaptist. Yeah,
Right. I wasn't brought up Anabaptist. I was brought up Catholic.
yeah, I know, I know, I
And I
know.
spent most of my life in the non-Anabaptist churches,
Hmm.
Protestant churches.
Hmm.
The Anabaptists just came into my life in 2005,
Hmm.
and they were only there for about 8 years.
Hmm.
Then they kicked me out. Yeah. Steve,
Yes, sir.
what you thinking, boss man?
Just lots and lots and lots of things for my own personal consideration, meditation. Just very, very rich. Uh, I'm not sure I have anything to add that would be profitable today. Um, and if I told you what I thought about the institutional church, this might be the last call I'd be allowed on because Paul said in Thessalonians that the Antichrist is going to be so close to the real thing. It's that if it was possible to be able to deceive the very elect. And so, in terms of the institutional beast, I'm pretty pessimistic.
Uh-huh. I am too. So you're not going to get thrown
All
off.
right, good.
We're all in
Yeah,
agreement with you one
uh,
way or another.
I'm only showing you two cards out of my five card hand, but
Okay.
that's enough for today.
Oh
And I'm in a good mood today too, so it's like I can set the other three cards down for a while. No, no,
no.
I just and even as you're talking about the two ladies, I just find it very odd that in an overwhelmingly patriarchal culture, even in the emergent church, that two ladies would be called out and by name. And if human nature is human nature, it's always about power, money, status, and success. And it's just got me curious. Nothing. Trying to be dogmatic about it, but we know Philippi was a wealthy city. There were gold mines, like you said. There's money in Philippi, And being human beings, I don't think have changed significantly in a couple of thousand years. Uh, Factionalism.
Hmm.
It's just an interesting meditation. Why? And it's so contrary to he who did not grasp. So
Uh-huh.
it just makes me wonder about where were they not like minded about what? It's always money, power, or status,
Yeah.
and so I don't think it's like a church fight because I think it highly unlikely that they would have had leadership roles in the way that we would understand it, and I don't think the churches immediately became egalitarian, in 30 years or whatever. And so it's just got me meditating on, from a local church perspective, what could those two ladies have fallen out about? They were with him from the beginning. It's always money, power, and status, and then so the exhortation to be like minded to what? Not grabbing for power and status.
Yeah, that's been my gut feeling based upon the pattern of imitation that has been inculcated in this letter in three or four places. It has to do with not seizing or taking reputational status or power. That's what
Yeah,
I agree with you. You
yeah,
know.
and we know Lydia was wealthy.
Yeah.
She was in. So there's money in Philippi. You
Oh yeah.
mentioned it earlier. We could have a nice cultural. That's why I didn't want to get into it. Really, a really nice cultural sidebar. But there's money in Philippi, and when there's money, there's opinions about money.
Cheryl just read me this thing today about this church, and this the people there when you go to their church to visit, you're asked to fill out the visitor form, and they're really particular about getting your telephone and email, but especially your street address. And they get your street address, and then they give it to some company that inputs it. And anybody that lives in a home that's valued above $1.5 million, the pastor goes and personally visits.
Give me the vomit bucket. Yeah, oh my Lord.
Yep.
Well, it
Well,
just
Steve, I saw two church ladies actually stop speaking to each other over a missing fork in the kitchen once. So,
glory.
it can be anything.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just got me thinking. And again, in a first century cultural context of a likely predominantly wealthy church, where does conflict come from? So I really enjoyed it, Michael. I thank you for the whole series.
Yeah. Welcome. Tom, Mike, anybody else?
I really enjoyed in chapter 1 the admonition to love abounding in knowledge. And I think probably my favorite thing that I learned in this series was in chapter 1, verse 10, in the word aproskopoi,
Uh-huh.
which is usually translated as blameless, but just not being in a rivalrous position. And I think we're talking about that today with
Mhm.
Eutychoi and Synecdoche. But yeah, just by placing themselves not in a rivalrous position, that they'll be able to um, to um, um, yeah, to pursue love, abounding
Uh-huh.
in knowledge. Yeah.
Hey, Tommy, I really like that. No, that's a beautiful thought. I think that's spot on. The other thing I was as we were wrapping up today, everything's collective for their society, right? So the peace that's promised, Christians tend to individualize, or Christians in the West anyway, we individualize everything. But it was about that non-rivalrous ethos having a community penetrating effect, upon which the release of the peace of God is the logical overflow, because God is not rivalrous. Jesus is not in rivalry with God. So the peace that is promised is not my personal happy little Jesus space.
Hmm.
It's about building a non-rivalrous community.
Um, I suppose my thoughts, as you know, I've been meditating a lot on Eti recently,
Hmm.
which I think is certainly the second half is another one of your prison letters.
Ah, okay. She wrote from prison too.
She wrote from the camp at Westerholm,
Oh, okay.
so definitely a prison letter. Quite probably one of the most insightful accounts of the Holocaust from that.
Okay. Which camp was she in again?
It was the one in Holland. It was like the transit camp when people were
Oh,
rounded up and then taken off by train to the Auschwitz and places.
okay.
So yeah, she viewed it from the inside as well as the outside. But what's been resonating with me because she talks a lot about the about finding your center,
Hmm.
which using different language is very much what Paul is talking about in Philippians as well,
Cool.
you know. And
Hmm.
she's got a couple of lines that came to mind. Um, she talks about our inner and our outer world, and the inner world is where you, in her language, you have a conversation with yourself, but you find God there as well,
Hmm.
and how to participate, and how they feed each other, and you shouldn't neglect one at the expense of the other. But she also says that the problem is that if you just focus on one and you ignore the inner world, that relationship with God, you impoverish your own personality. And she talks about how a great many people strike her as being divided in half and more or less disabled.
Huh.
And again, for me, that resonated with what Paul was saying.
Right.
And then just my last thought, there's just one line that really jumped out at me. One must expand one's heart to open it up to feed a multitude. And that's when we were talking about scaling it.
Hmm.
You know, you have to expand your one's heart to and she says to open it up, but I sort of think, well, to feed a multitude, because I'm thinking about the feeding of the 5,000 and the 4,000 and what was operating there.
Hmm.
Um, and what it means to expand your heart. Because what she's almost saying is, I think, it's an echo of the hymn in chapter 2, because he's saying that you know your love must go beyond just your immediate family and the people that you really care for. You have to expand your heart to a much wider circle.
Hmm.
Um, just great stuff.
Yeah. All right, peeps. Well, thank you for everything. I'll either see you Saturday at the seminar or in 3 weeks when we start Colossians on the 26th. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Peace and love, babes.
Take care.
Bye bye.